This is Anarchast.
Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Coming in live again from Acapulco, Mexico, and we have on the line, coming from just west, I believe, of London, Andrew Duncan, and he actually works at goldmoney.com. He's also an author and a very interesting guy, and it's a pleasure to have you on, Andrew.
Nice to be here, Jeff.
And the first question I always ask everybody is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, I've been dreading this question, but I think I better get it off my chest. Unfortunately, I started on the wrong side of the fence. I was a very kind of naughty boy, and teachers at state schools never used to like me because I used to ask questions all the time. So I was about 8 years old.
Yeah, they don't like those questions.
Oh, they really disliked me. They actually put me into a remedial class at a school, and because they just didn't like me so much. I had no way to get any information. So again, unfortunately, I went to a local state library, which is the Tully House Library in Carlisle, which is kind of where I grew up in Cumbria, which is just south of Scotland. And in there, in the children's section, there was a whole shelf of really positive books about the Soviet Union. And I started reading all these books, and I really started getting into socialism. And then once I got through those, once I was about 9 or 10, I then went into the adult section, and I actually read Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto and all these things. And although I didn't understand those books, because I realised many, many years later that it's impossible to understand them because they're full of nonsense, I thought I understood them, and so I became a kind of raving 11-year-old socialist. And I calmed down eventually. I stopped being a Stalinist. I became more of a kind of Trotskyite, and I ended up as a kind of what you might call a left anarchist, because I knew there was something wrong with the world. I just couldn't figure out what it was, and that's the problem with socialism. It offers so many nice solutions. So I was reading things like 1984, and I was reading things about the Soviet Gulag, and I was reading Brave New World and various other things which are kind of anti-state. But at the same time, I was a left anarchist. So it was a really weird cognitive dissonance for years and years and years. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, I eventually ended up working with a group in the UK inside the New Labour organisation. And the New Labour organisation eventually elected Tony Blair. And I thought that was wonderful in 1997 as part of this movement that had helped him and Gordon Brown get elected. A bit like probably people in the US think of electing Obama 4 years ago. It was everyone was happy. Now, because I was still very independent, I was running my own business. And the first thing the Labour Party did, the Labour government did in 97, was introduce tax rules and regulation rules, which completely crushed my business. And that fortunately, strangely, threw me over the edge. That made me realise I had something desperately wrong. I mean, I was over 30 at the time, but I knew something was desperately wrong. So I was searching for 2 or 3 years, and eventually I stumbled across Atlas Shrugged. Now, I was never really that big a fan of Atlas Shrugged, because I do find it's a little bit wooden, and that John Galt speech is just too long at the end. But I did discover the phrase Mises in right near the end of the book. So I got onto the internet, found out who Mises was, and thought, right, I'm ordering this book. And this is actually, if I just get it down, this is actually the book which kind of saved my life. This is the actual copy. I read this. I didn't understand it the first time, but I knew that I had to understand it. So I persevered, wrapped a towel around my head and read it again, and I got it. And as soon as I got that, I then ordered this one, and 2 very large men brought it from the postal truck. I then got into this one. And ever since, I've really been a Rothbardian, and that's what did it for me. That was Saul on the road to Damascus. The socialist scales kind of fell from my eyes, and I became a kind of full-blown, almost instantaneously from reading Man, Economy and State, kind of became a full-blown Rothbardian.
That's great. Wow, you brought up so many topics that we can talk about, including school. I don't know if you've seen in the U.S. now, they've got a number of schools that they actually have solitary confinement places.
Oh, it's appalling, isn't it? I mean, they are just day prisons, aren't they? They're just day prisons for children to enable tax slaves to go out and earn some tax. There's authority. If you disobey any infractions, no matter how spurious, from this self-appointed authority, they use phrase detention. Now, where's the only other place in society where they use the phrase detention? And that's in prisons. It's detention is punishment for daring to disobey authority. And they put children through, a kind of real long kind of propagandizing program of believing that everything that is good comes from government, which because we know is untrue. I was fooled until I was over 30. But just like when you see those pictures of left anarchists being beaten up by the police, the left anarchists are demanding more state. The police who are beating them up are more state. So they kind of get it half right. They know there's a problem. And then, like I did in the 1980s, they'll see someone like Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan, and they'll attribute everything bad to the right, and then become even more left-wing. And it's very sad. So what I did, once the scales did fall from my eyes, I kind of really got into Austrian economics and reading up on things. I was very, very lucky to eventually meet in Oxford University, of strangely of all places, which is about 30 miles from here. I met Professor Hopper, and if I can just find it, wait a minute, where is it? Somewhere up here. I should know where it is. Shouldn't? Oh, here. No, that's the wrong one. Oh, here it is. Got it. And he very kindly signed for me this Democracy, the God That Failed. And again, this was a kind of another epiphany moment. I thought being a Rothbardian was good enough, but once you get into this, into Democracy, the God That Failed, everything's wonderful. And then from there, he invited me to the Bodrum Conference, the Property and Freedom Society in Turkey that he has each year. And from then, I've kind of decided that, well, my family comes first, number one. My business, my sort of self-employed business and businesses comes second to support my family. But anything else which comes after those two is me trying to help other people like me who've come halfway but have not quite made the mental leap to Austrian economics and liberty, to help them see through the kind of mafia organisation that is government, and help them realise that liberty and freedom and a totally voluntary society are, I think, are the future of humanity. How long it takes us to get there is debatable, but I think eventually we'll get there, because that's what we had 20,000 years ago for a million years, 2 million years. We had a totally voluntary society. Then about 10,000 years ago, we got into wheat farming. The farmers then became sedentary. Then bandits could parasitise upon the sedentary farmers, take some of their wheat and so on. And we've had a state ever since. And eventually we will go back to freedom, I'm sure.
Yeah, you brought up so many other great points that we should touch on. First of all, Hans-Hermann Hoppe. I've been trying to have him on Anarchast for a few months, but we just have not connected yet. But hopefully very soon. He's definitely one of the great minds of our what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to get an invite to Turkey next year.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many things to talk about that you just brought up. I don't even know where to start. Why don't we start with? You talked about you don't know how long it'll take before we get there. You're quite involved in the financial business with the goldmoney.com, so you're following what's going on in the economy, fiat currencies, paper money.
Yeah.
What do you see happening there? What's your general guess as to what's going to happen with all that?
Well, I think they'll keep stringing things out as long as they can. I think they'll just keep kicking the can until eventually, like rolling this hill up, rolling a stone up this hill in Greek mythology, the whole thing will come crashing down. And there'll come a point where the central banks either say, okay, we'll accept hyperinflation and just print, or they'll stop, and then we'll have a liquidating depression. It's too hard to say what they'll do, because I think the central bankers, I would bet that at one point they'll just say, no, we can't go into hyperinflation. They'll stop. Then there'll be the liquidation to end all liquidations. But I could be wrong. The politicians could just say, no, we don't care what you want to do. We're going to print anyway, take over the Bank of England's printing presses directly from the Treasury in the UK, for instance, and then just take us into hyperinflation. Now, one of my favourite novels actually is Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson, and in that he describes a world where we break down into many, many different units. So we have I think Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong. You can have these little micro territories. So but who knows what will happen? Maybe the United States will break down into 50 countries, maybe more countries. Maybe New Hampshire might become because it's got a seaboard and everything, might become an independent place. I think the smaller government is the better. Obviously, we can secede all the way down to the individual, become perpetual travellers and so on, and be our own mini state as our individuals. But anything which is smaller is better. So anything which can break the UK up into Scotland, Wales, England, anything which can break Europe up into, I think the Germans missed a great opportunity, for instance, with East Germany and West Germany. I think if they'd left it as Prussia and just had a separate Germany and kept West Germany and called it, broken that up into the many Germanies we used to have, which used to be so wonderful culturally, producing all those musicians in the 18th and 19th centuries and all those wonderful writers and so on. That would have been better than joining Germany into one again and then turning into a greater Germany, a Eurozone super Germany. I think hopefully when the paper money collapse does come, just like Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union and so on, these states will be powerless to stop secession and to stop Catalonia breaking away from Spain, to stop New Hampshire breaking away, and Texas and Alaska and Hawaii breaking away from the United States. It could hold them. My worry, I think we must be entirely peaceful in everything we do. I think we must be entirely just use ideas and write and things. We must always preach the kind of message of total toleration and total peacefulness and just see what happens. But hopefully the giant states will, like Euroland and the US, will break apart naturally and easily into smaller units. And then once that process kicks off, hopefully they'll distill into even smaller places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, these little microstates we're seeing in Central America, your Gold's Gulch in Chile. We've got Doug Casey in Argentina with his little bit of action down there. So that's what I hope will happen. The other side, of course, I think is that states could be like a cornered starving bear, and they could respond extremely violently. That's
it's really interesting, before. Isn't it? Being anarchists, that our biggest hope is for more government or more governments. Less, smaller governments, but more until we eventually have 7 billion governments. That'd be the best case scenario. And that's, you brought up a big word, secession, and I always say, if at first you don't secede, try again. And you're seeing it happening all over the world, and we're really seeing this whole system fail now. It was a ridiculous system that really started in 1971, and it was all based on debt, and it was based on centralized planning of the economy, and the governments have been incredibly involved in socialism and spreading the wealth, taking away from productive people and giving it to non-productive people, which is the exact, that you'd never want to do that. So we've really just been going through a really crazy period if you really look at it objectively. And I agree with you completely. I think anything could happen at this point, and that's why people really need to, if you have some assets, protect them, get them outside of the control of your own government. If you don't have any assets and you still live in a place like the US or the UK, look to expatriate somewhere else. There's not going to be a lot of opportunity, I don't believe, in the next few years in those places, whereas in other places like Asia or Latin America, I see a lot of opportunity. Do you generally agree with that?
Yes, I think you're right. I think anyone who can learn Chinese, for instance, it's a difficult language, can learn Mandarin will do extremely well. I think this is like the Jim Rogers idea. I think London was the city of the 19th century. New York was the city of the. It goes where's the freedom? I mean, the people in Amsterdam realised there was more freedom in London, so they all moved to London a few hundred years ago, and then they moved from London to New York to New Amsterdam, which then became New York when the Duke of York invaded it broke down the Wall Street Wall. I think the next place to move is Singapore. I think Singapore will be the hub, the centre of at least the Southeast Asian kind of economy. I think as well, maybe, you'll know much more than me about this, the South American axis will be good with Brazil and Chile and Mexico maybe, and Argentina and so on could be the other axis. So I think if anyone's got children who are good at languages, I think either learn Spanish or learn Mandarin and then go to somewhere Spanish, or go to somewhere where Chinese is a big part of the culture, like Hong Kong or Singapore, or maybe, this is weird, isn't it? Maybe even moving to communist China is a better deal than staying in the Western democracies.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Everything flip-flopped about 20 years ago. It used to be they were the commies. U.S. used to be thought of as the free place, and it's all kind of flip-flopping right now. And this is it's been going on in human history for thousands of years. What happens generally is places become freer, either through collapse and then they become free, or they just have the idea to become freer. They generate a ton of wealth because of it. It generates immeasurable wealth when you have a free place, and then all of a sudden people get lazy, they stop thinking too much. These sociopaths go into government, they start telling them, well, we have so much now, we have to really help the poor. And I'm all for helping the poor, but you can't help them by giving them money. That's an insane concept that has never worked. Welfare has never worked. Just look at Native Americans as one excellent example of people who have been on welfare for 100 years, and look at the many of the black people in the U.S. who have been on welfare for generations. It's not helping them at all. It's the whole teach a man to fish thing. And so, yeah, it's really amazing that we have to keep searching for new places to go. And as you know, you asked about South America. I identified. I've been to every country almost in South America, except for the few little tiny ones on the right side there. I forget even the names of them. They're so small, it doesn't really matter. But Chile, by far, is the bastion of freedom in South America right now. Argentina, of course, is going the way of Venezuela at the moment, but they'll probably collapse soon. And then after that, there might be freedom again. We're going to see collapses happening all over the place, and there is a big hope that it will actually turn into a much better place afterwards. But we have to get through the collapse. And you're there in the UK, so I want to ask you, because I'm not totally up to date on everything going on in the UK. The finances of the UK government, the debt, the money printing. What do you see happening there?
Oh, it's hilarious. I mean, today we've had in the UK Parliament, we've had George Osborne, who's the Conservative Chancellor, and Ed Balls, who's the New Labour Shadow Chancellor, who actually taught Gordon Brown everything he knew about Keynesianism. Absolutely hammer and tongs arguing and screaming at each other about £1.5 billion. This current most people in this country I think 6% of people in this country have realised that this current government is actually increasing the British government's debt. I think over the course of the Parliament, they plan to raise the British government debt by £600 billion. But I think about 90% of people in this country think that they're cutting the debt. They're cutting that, the kind of nominal kind of headline figure of 1 trillion down. They're not. They're actually increasing that. Forget about obligations. Forget about pensions. Some people value these other pensions and things at about £5 trillion. But let's just forget about those. They're actually planning to increase the British government debt by £600 billion, which is something like £10,000 for every single human being in the country, half of whom work for the government, and many of whom are children and old people. And so the people are actually working. It might be £50,000 per working person, and they're increasing that. But most people think they're decreasing it. And again, hammer and tongs over £1.5 billion. So the government's taking in £550 billion approximately. They're borrowing approximately £150 billion. And these two groups of politicians are dancing on the head of a pin about a minuscule rounding error spending difference. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, the exact same thing's happening in the U.S. right now with the so-called fiscal cliff crisis. The two sides are arguing over how to reduce the total amount of deficit by 1.5 trillion over the next 10 years, but they're actually planning on increasing the deficit by about 10 to 15 trillion over that same time period. So all they're talking about is a 10% reduction in the amount of debt that they might do over 10 years, which of course, as everyone knows with these politicians, they don't plan anything ahead of 4 or 5 years, obviously. And it's truly unbelievable that people still believe in these politicians. They believe they're trying to do something good. These people have no skin in the game. They basically have gravitated to government because they like power and they like to control people and they like to have control of their money and decide what to do with it. But they definitely have no interest in helping anybody at all.
No, helping themselves. I think this is the book you need to read if you want to find out about that kind of thing. Again, Hopper here says the countries with the freest internal structure will, because they're free inside, will generate the most wealth. Now the politicians, the gangs, the mafia gangs who control those incomes, those cash flows, because they can't do anything inside, they will go out external and then take their power external. We've seen it with Rome, same thing there. I mean, you've got these 7 little towns, and they came up with some great natural law, which became Roman law, which became classical European law. So there's some great laws based on property rights and liberty and so on. And then you get the Roman state, and then it becomes democratic, and then it becomes imperial, then it becomes literally fascistic. That's where we get, the fasces from. And then then we get welfare to trap people. Then we get a huge bureaucracy, then huge armies, Praetorian regiments, and the regiments of the Rhine and the Danube. And then everything implodes. All the gold goes to the east to pay for various things like silks and so on, and various other imports from the east. So all the wealth drains out of the empire, and then the whole thing collapses, and we have a dark age. So we see it all in Roman history. Same thing with British history. Britain has the most relatively free culture in Europe, after many fights between the Normans and the Saxons and the Vikings and the Celts and everybody. Because that internal freedom generates enormous wealth, that wealth then is used by the state to pay for the navy and the armies. Those armies and that navy then generates the empire. The empire becomes unbearable to people around the world, and then is thrown off in America, thrown off in various other places, and then eventually collapses. So we've seen this many, many times, and I think that what we have now is the American empire, and we're going through the same thing again. I mean, many people have said this. I know I'm just regurgitating what many people have said before, but the American empire and the Roman empire are extremely similar things, and they're both going through similar processes. And what I'm afraid of is that we end up with a dark age. I mean, the Romans introduced serfdom, where sons had to do the father's occupations, and you also got you got appointed as a tax collector. You had to collect taxes in your local area. So what people did is if you didn't want to be a carpenter and you didn't want to collect taxes, the only thing you could do was escape north to where the barbarians were. And so people were just flooding out of the Roman Empire, heading into the arms of the barbarians and wanting to be with the Germans and north of Europe. And then the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire at least, collapses. And then we see the Eastern Roman Empire survives because of gold money. So we have the Byzant, and they kept that gold money going for nearly 1,000 years. And when did the Byzantine Empire collapse? When they started debasing the Byzant, the gold coin, the solid gold aureus. So this is why I really welcome the opportunity to work for gold money, which is a great opportunity that came out of the blue, because I can use that as a vehicle to help promote the Austrian school, to help pronounce sound money, because I really do think gold is liberty. I think liberty is gold, gold is liberty. So anything I can do to help gold money promote the idea of sound money and promote the Austrian school is a great opportunity for me, and I'm really enjoying it, and speaking to people like you, and a great privilege of speaking to Ron Paul and Steve Baker and Godfrey Bloom and lots of Peter Schiff and lots of different people, and I think it's absolutely fabulous, and I hope I can keep that going for a while.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm a big fan of gold money. I've had an account there for a number of years. For people who don't know, it's a way to invest in gold. It's very simple to do. It's very easy, and you can actually internationalize it. How many vaults do you guys have around the world?
I'm not entirely sure, because I'm kind of and I live and work in Henley on Thames. I'm actually, by trade, I'm kind of a financial trainer. Actually, I learned about finance because I was really interested in Austrian economics. And what I find really strange is I now teach finance to bankers, which is in the City of London and Singapore and New York. And I find that really bizarre, because I'll explain fractional reserve banking to people and so on. So I'm not actually in the core of gold money in Jersey. I'm kind of, I do various things for them on the outside. But I think there's, because I'm a gold money subscriber as well as you are. I have a pension with gold money. I have a savings account with gold money. So I'm kind of into the whole thing personally. I think they have a vault in Hong Kong. They have a vault in Switzerland. There's a vault in London, and there's perhaps big news coming out about other things as well. I think James Turk is a tremendous visionary. I really admire him. I think it's a great privilege for me to know him. It's a fantastic privilege for me to speak to him. I was actually having dinner with him a couple of weeks ago, and I was kind of having a kind of starstruck thing where I was finding it difficult to speak, because I was with this man who I've admired for years as a great visionary, and he's for me a great promoter of the ideas of, well, gold and liberty. So it's absolutely wonderful that I can be involved with gold money. But I think the idea is to have various vaults around the world in places where you can diversify and internationalize your assets in countries which are extremely unlikely to ever confiscate or ever take your gold. So places like Hong Kong and various other vaults.
Yeah, and we're going to have James Turk on soon on Anarchast. He's an anarchist, and I was very happy to hear that. I wasn't aware that he was until recently, so that's great. And yeah, he's doing great work, and we totally subscribe to what he's talking about. That's what we talk about at the Dollar Vigilante is getting into hard assets, internationalizing them, so it reduces the chances that the governments can steal from you, and that's basically what we're trying to do. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the great things he's done actually is the one here. Let's just talk about this while it's here. It wasn't entirely Human Action which saved me. This is the second book. I don't know if you can see it on the video. This is the second book which really helped save me, by von Mises. Every now and again, I get this weird socialist thing from inside me, and it kind of takes me over, and I get full of envy and bitterness and anger and all the other things socialists suffer from. Whenever that happens to me, I always grab this from the shelf and start rereading it. And this always cures me again. It's like kind of my lifetime. I'm going to carry this around with, if I come to Acapulco to come and see you at your beach bar, I'll be bringing this book with me because this is my kind of talisman, my kind of daily cure whenever I have a problem with socialism. But one of the other things, while we're here, that James Turk has done, he's promoted the work of Jesus Huerta de Soto. And if anybody really wants to understand money and banking and so on, it's a heavy book. I mean, you can see how thick it is, but it's well worth reading because it's beautifully written. It explains from Rome, it goes all the way back to Rome and the legal nature. And you say the monetary system was destroyed from 1971 onwards. It's actually been a far longer process. It's taken governments and these mafia organizations known as states hundreds of years to take our money from us. And all of that process is described in here, going up from probably there to there. We go up to the Medicis in Florence and fractional reserve banking and Niccolo Machiavelli and so on. And how when you put money in a bank, you lose ownership of it, and that's protected by governments because the banks then lend the money to governments. So governments give them the privilege of taking your wealth off you that you deposit inside banks. And then we get into fractional reserve banking. Then we get into the 19th century, the British gold standard. And then we get into the kind of early 20th century, and then we get into kind of from 1971 onwards. So if anyone's really, really interested in money, this is the book that you need to read. And this is the work of Jesus Huerta de Soto has been massively promoted by James Turk, and I take my hat off to him for doing that.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of words like you've been saved. You're holding up these books almost like Bibles. You talked about a carpenter in Rome who was trying to just exist and try to be left alone by the state. The most famous anarchist of all time was Jesus, who basically was just saying, leave me alone. I don't want to be a part of this collective of the Roman government. I don't want to pay taxes to them. And he preached the ultimate anarchist principle, which is non-aggression. Do unto others as they do unto you. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's all been lost over time, thanks to the Roman Catholic Church, who now say he was all about, if you masturbate, you're going to burn forever, and all these sort of ludicrous concepts. It's unfortunate that a lot of that has been lost over time.
I think this is the foundation of many religions, actually. I think religions evolve, and I think the most successful religions have within them, embedded within their core, the kind of natural law which arose from the kind of Stone Age. So in the Stone Age, a tribe, if you read The Fatal Conceit and various other books by Hayek, in the Stone Age, you meet another tribe, you had a choice. You could either wipe them out and take their stuff, but that was it. It was a one-off deal because you wiped them out and took their stuff and you had their stuff once. Or you could trade with them voluntarily. And you didn't get all their stuff immediately like you would if you wiped them out. But you got a little bit of stuff from them. You got a little bit of wealth. You exchanged flint for skins and spearheads for arrowheads, and eventually you developed much more wealth by doing this. And so those natural laws about do not steal, do not murder, do not be envious, eventually they form a core of laws which are embedded into religions like Christianity, and you see them in the Ten Commandments directly: do not kill, do not steal, do not covet another man's property. So they're embedded within the heart of all successful religions. And if you follow those basic laws, like I'm not so sure whether Jesus existed. I'm very much a Robert Graves fan, so and his King Jesus book. But if he did, all he was doing was applying natural law to a difficult situation, and he saw the Roman state for what it was: a predatory mafia organization.
Yeah, I apologize to viewers. This is going on longer than we normally go, but Andrew has so many great comments and insights that I want to keep talking about this. And one of the things that I've been talking about lately is how a lot of these neocons, and a lot of them are Catholic or Christian, really believe in the war state, and they believe that we need a huge military to protect ourselves. And of course, the Department of Defense in the U.S. is just the Department of Offense, but they really believe in this. But the world's changed a lot, and you brought it up. Even in the old days, it didn't make a lot of sense to go in and just steal everything, but it did make some sense back then. But nowadays, it makes no sense whatsoever. I think more people than ever have finally realized that it makes more sense just to trade. For example, I was saying the other day, we don't need all these militaries. There's no chance all these kids with iPhones and iPads are going to just get up and go into a town and kill and rape and steal everything, because there's really not much to steal. Most of the wealth that we have today is almost virtual. It's not like we all just have gold everywhere that people can take. A lot of those are in vaults that they're very hard to get into all around the world now. So what are you going to steal? Some flat screen TVs? I think it was sort of the whole military concept is an anachronism. It's something that doesn't make any sense in today's world. And for all the neocons, and I think there's 3 probably still watching at this point, you really don't need these big militaries anymore. And what you really need is just to protect yourself. And neocons will understand this. And I'm a big proponent of protecting yourself. Own a gun or whatever you need, or hire your own personal security or private. If you don't have to pay taxes, you'll have a lot of money to be able to do those sort of things. Or just hire a private security firm, or any business that you go into a mall, you go into a nightclub, they all have private security. There's actually 3 times more money spent on private security in the U.S. than on the police, and you never hear about private security guard beating up people or raping people. It just doesn't happen. The free market really monitors itself, and we really don't need anything like we used to need, and people need to get over all those old concepts. But unfortunately, thanks to the government indoctrination centers who teach a history that as though it's still, well, first of all, the history they teach isn't even correct, and then they talk about it like that still exists today. A lot of things have changed. We're really expanding as humanity right now, and mostly thanks to technology. And so people really need to rethink all of the concepts of what they think they really need in their lives.
I think there's many things you've brought up there. I think the key thing to this is the indoctrination centres, the day prisons. Because that's what makes people think war is good. Because in those places, people are swearing on the flag and being told the British Army is wonderful, being told the American Army is wonderful, protecting our freedoms. I mean, it takes 20 years of programming inside these institutions. I mean, the British government this year has just raised the compulsory attendance age now, I think, to 17. Very little coverage in the press here. So they have truancy and problems and things. Why? Because they're imprisoning these young people in these day prisons, and just keeping them off the unemployment registers and giving teachers a job, giving teachers something to do who are mostly state supporters. So I think the key to much of the big key is money, but the secondary key is education, because even when you've come out of your schools, you still get your programming from the government licensed media channels. I don't think it's called program. I don't think the phrase programming is a kind of mistake. It is programming. I mean, one problem I have is occasionally I watch the BBC News. I used to be a wonderful fan of the BBC. I used to think it was wonderful when I was a socialist. But now I look at it, I find it unwatchable. It's just propaganda. It's unbelievable. And here's a really strange thing. When I was a teenager in the early 1980s, I used to listen to Radio Moscow because I was very foolish then. And I believed, the tractor factory statistics. But now I actually do believe Russia Today. Where's the best news programming coming from? It's coming from Russia Today. It's coming from Max Kaiser on Russia Today. It's coming from Lauren Lister on Russia Today. Isn't that weird? Radio Moscow has become Russia Today, and it used to broadcast lies, and now it's broadcasting the truth. I find this whole concept bizarre, but I think the key to this is we've got to get the governments out of schools. Homeschooling is a great thing. Private education is still state monitored, is better than state education if you can afford it. Reading books yourselves, and this is the great key thing, one of the key points you brought up, the internet. I'm Facebooking with some guy in Afghanistan or Pakistan or India or somewhere, and then a Hellfire missile gets fired from a drone near to them. When I have a personal connection with somebody, once we know each other around the world, then it's very hard to paint these people in these kind of 10-minute hates from 1984 as evil personified. They're friends, they're people, they're human beings. And once we realise that, we're going to withdraw our support for this indiscriminate killing of people around the world in our name and paid for with our taxes. And once we withdraw our mental support, this is what I'm trying to do with my little website, thegodthatfailed.org, and everything I'm trying to do with Gold Money. Once people withdraw their support from this, I think the game's over for the government, the state, and I'm hoping that we'll go to a snow crash world where Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong becomes the dominant country around the world because it uses solid money, it uses Hong Kong dollars, and it uses and when you get there, you're protected and you're safe and you're free.
Talking about the day camps, the indoctrination centers, Vladimir Lenin had a famous quote that said, give me your child for 4 years and the seed I plant will never be uprooted. And it's really sad today that so many people give their children to the state to be educated, and that's another word we can talk about another time. And that's exactly what happens, and it's truly sad, but I really believe, like you, that we're going to move on to something greater, but we have to get through the transition in the meantime. But we've gone on very long now, and I try to keep these videos a little shorter because of the attention deficit disorders. I don't want anyone to be forced onto Adderall or Ritalin for watching these videos.
Yeah.
So
I would have been in the 70s, but fortunately those drugs didn't exist. Before we go, can I do a shameless plug?
Yes, of course, please do.
Okay. A very good, very close personal friend of mine called Jack England has written this fantastic novel called Sword of Marathon. Now, it's about the Battle of Marathon, which is about the European stopping of tyranny from the Persian Empire coming into Europe. It's full of gold, it's full of silver, it's full of sex, it's full of action, it's full of all sorts of wonderful things. It's a kind of cross between Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series, Lord of the Rings. There's a little bit of Master and Commander in there, maybe even a bit of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So if anybody out there is looking for a fantastic bit of entertainment for Christmas, do log on to Amazon, get the Kindle version or the paper version of Sword of Marathon by my very, very good close personal friend, Mr. Jack England. It's fabulous. The best book I've ever read in my entire life.
It sounds like you know him very well, and it sounds excellent. And
he's a very deep,
I'll
close personal
definitely
friend.
pick it up on Amazon, and we'll try to post a link in the notes below this video. And it's been a true pleasure. Andrew Duncan, coming in from the UK. Thanks for being on with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for speaking to me, Jeff.
Oh, it's my pleasure as well. And that's all for Anarchast, your hope for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.